Or good afternoon. Everybody can hear me. I am Teresa Mills. I am a community organizer and the grants manager for CHEJ. This is a training call on oil and gas waste. Dr. John Stolz from Duquesne, I will have him give you his bio in just a minute. He will be our presenter for today. If you have any questions for Dr. Stolz, please put them in the chat. And after he is finished, then Sharon will go through and read the questions to Dr. Stolz for him to answer. So sit back and enjoy this. Dr. Stolz did this for us last year and it was amazing. So welcome everybody and thank you. Dr. Stolz, you want to introduce yourself and give your bio.
All right, great. Yeah, so I'm Dr. John Stolz from Duquesne University. I'm a full professor of biology, but also the director of the Center for Environmental Research and Education. I've got a background in both microbiology, specifically environmental microbiology and ecology, as well as I work on microbe, sediment, and mineral interactions. So this is something that, people ask me, how did I get involved with fracking? A lot of the environments that I've studied prior to have a lot to do with it. And so it's been rather fascinating for me. So today, I think I want to give you some background on the waste stream. And so again, I gave this presentation last June, I believe. And I have a few things to update, but again, the idea is, and what my primary goal is to make sure that waste from oil and gas does not wind up in things like our drinking water. I know there are folks that deal with air issues and surface contamination stuff, but my primary focus has been on water. And so for the last over a decade now, we've been going out into the environment and taking natural samples as well as testing people's private water wells for their water quality and again, looking at the chemistry to see whether or not there's indicators that these water sources have been impacted. And this kind of summarizes the one premise is that, how is it possible that waste from oil and gas could wind up in our drinking water? You might say, well, okay, if you have a private well and you're living next to a well pad, you could see possibly how that could happen. But what about public drinking water? And so today I'm going to talk to you a little bit about some of the research that we've done over the last few years that basically made the connection between oil and gas drilling wastes, especially the liquid wastes, and the quality of our drinking water in the region. So this is a picture that I took back in 2010, if you can believe it, obviously from an airplane. But this is the early days in which they were drilling into the Marcellus. This is what we would call the vertical aspect, where it's a very small rig, but they're drilling down. They're going to be putting in casings to hopefully protect the aquifer. But again, what are you seeing here? There's this waste pit here that has drill cuttings. And of course, this is all done with a wet drill bit with lubricants and surfactants. And that's what this stuff is. So basically that they're, starting to drill. And in this particular case, they're going vertically. Eventually they, finish the well and inject it with tens of millions of gallons of fluids, including chemicals and propant, which is the sand to hold up the cracks. But eventually, water both from the formation as well as some of the fracking fluids themselves come back up, and they're basically stored in these things we call condensate tanks. So early on, it's called flowback, and that's the material or liquids that have similar characteristics to what they actually put down the hole. And then eventually, as those fluids interact with the rock, in this case, Marcellus or Utica shale, it leaches some of those constituents that are found in the shales. I point out here, and again, this is a photograph I took back in the summer of 2010, that these tanks are actually hazard placarded for both toxic and flammability. And you can see that they're labeled produced water and crude oil. But amazingly enough, as this goes from here to the truck, oh, I took that slide out. Anyway, it's now brine or residual waste. So just the matter of it going from here to here, it's been redefined. And you can see these trucks all over Western Pennsylvania and West Virginia and in your neighborhood in Ohio. And there's a number of truckers, but they basically say brine or residual waste, but they're not hazard placarded. And why would that be important? Well, anyway, this is a series of produced water that I received from, again, an anonymous source. It turns out, however, that we know that this material actually came from, let me see it, okay, chat. Okay, sorry. All right, so it's just a question, not I'm doing anything. Everybody can hear me, right? We're good. Anyway, this is from the Day well in the Bakken, which is in North Dakota. But you and that's an oil well. But you can see over time, each one of these containers represents 500 barrels, and you have to multiply that by 42 because there's 42 gallons in a barrel to understand actual volumes. But this is the first 500 barrels. This is 24 samples later, which basically 24 times 500 barrels to figure that out. But you can see over time that it's getting juicier and juicier and juicier, as far as this is basically now crude oil, as well as the salts have increased. Okay. So they have this produced water. What do they do with it? And how do they take care of it? Well, again, there's a number of different ways in which you can treat this water. Obviously, one of the most popular ways is with deep injection wells, and Ohio has over 200. I'm sure it's up to over 250 by this time. They're called Class 2. There's minimum processing, but limited by geology. And of course, we've heard, and Youngstown knows quite well, they can produce earthquakes. And then, of course, there's specific processes for the different components. There's media filtration, there's separation of the oil and grease, there's biological and aerated filters, there's microfiltration, ultrafiltration, etc. And of course, reverse osmosis. There's distillation, there are evaporation ponds out west where there's a water issue and they've got high rates of evaporation. They oftentimes just let the stuff sit in open pits for days and weeks until it evaporates, and then they just collect all the solid stuff and bring it to landfill. There's chemical precipitation, evaporation ponds, I said that already, anion and cation exchange processes, and an emerging process called electrocoagulation. I've even seen witnessed a facility that uses plasma, which is high energy heat. But all these things cost money, and you still have to deal with the solid waste at the end, and of course the radioactivity, which we'll talk about later. There's different types of wells. Class 1 injects hazardous waste. Class 2 injects brines and other fluids. Again, it's all by definition. As soon as you define what comes out of the ground from these oil and gas wells as brine, it opens up a variety of different end points for its disposal. But class 2 are essentially for brines and other fluids associated with oil and gas production and for hydrocarbon storage. And you can see that it's pretty popular. There's over, at this point, when I took a look at this from the oil and gas, this is your ODNR, by the way, there were over 151,000 of them across the country. So again, it's established technology. It's for salt water. The area of review within one of these wells is only a quarter of a mile. They have to see if there's abandoned wells or other operations, surface things. But again, you're looking at a typical well. A lot of times, and what we've been doing more in Pennsylvania is we'll repurpose an abandoned oil or gas well. Instead of drawing stuff out, we just use it for injection. It may need some reinforcement of the surface casing. But again, and if you go to your ODNR site and look at the wonderful video that they had, there's never been an issue with injection wells. So this was a map from a couple of years ago showing the location. And again, those of you in the eastern part of the state, you're blessed not only with things like Marcellus and Utica and Upper Devonian shales, as well as a legacy of a lot of conventional oil and gas wells, but you also have a plethora of Class II brine injection wells. And again, what could possibly go wrong? Number one answer is casing failure. Again, one of the typical things that I've seen over the years where these injection well facilities have issues is that they try and push down fluids at a too high a rate, so that basically test the integrity of the casing. There's also been recent incidents. Redbird number 4 is an example where the unintended consequence was it communicated with shallower conventional wells. And it was kind of interesting because the facility was injecting all these oil and gas wastes. And suddenly the conventional operators that had wells in this higher formation noticed a dramatic increase in their wastewater. And so they were taking it back to this injection facility. And you can see that this is a wonderful endless cycle. And it was finally realized that the injection well had communicated with these conventional wells at higher or shallower depths. And then, of course, comes to the crux. And this is something that Justin Noble published back in the spring of 2021, that it turns out that oil and gas waste is America's radioactive secret. So the industry has known for years. And subsequently, and again, I'll just point out, what does that say right there? Oh, it's just brine. This is salt water. Again, would you want to, I'm brining, they were out of corned beef for this Thursday, and I'm actually brining my own corn slab of brisket, but I would really not want to be using this brine to make my corned beef, okay, just as an example, but they will tell you, oh, it's just brine, it's just salty water. It's got other stuff in it. So thanks to, again, an anonymous source, these are samples that I was able, yeah. Did someone say something? Anyway, this due to an anonymous source from Ohio, he was an Ohio waste hauler. I got a variety of different samples from a number of different places in Ohio, but we're now looking at the radioactivity, and basically it's primarily radium-226 and radium-228. Talk about this in a little bit more detail, but some of these numbers are astounding. Again, this is in picocuries per liter. There are 3.8 liters in a gallon. And again, when we look at some of the wastewater volumes, they're reporting it in barrels. So you just do the math. It's 3.5 times 42. And that will give you an idea of how many gallons of waste that this industry is producing. It's on the order of 1 trillion gallons a year of this stuff across the country. But let's take a look at some of these values here. This Thompson Run, we're talking about 7,000 picocuries of radium-226 and over 1,000 picocuries per liter of 228. You know, the allowable amount in drinking water of total radiation is 5 picocuries. If you have radon in your house, you don't want more than 4 picocuries. So again, these numbers are of concern. And then when you realize that your typical waste hauler's got a tank of 4,500 gallons, that this stuff adds up. But this is old news. This is an article from the New York Times that was published in December of 1990. Tests of wells in Louisiana and southern states have found that oil water mixture pumped to the surface contains radiation levels 5 to 30 times higher than the government allows to be released from nuclear power plants. In contrast to the heavily regulated nuclear power industry, where emissions are strictly controlled and workers heavily protected, radiation in the oil industry has been wholly uncontrolled. Okay, and cutting to the chase here, why ever would they want this sort of exemption, if you will? They say disposing the waste in abandoned wells is safer and less expensive than shipping and storing the waste at a cost of $300 to $500 a barrel. Okay, think about that, $300 to $500 a barrel if they were to treat it appropriately. And that was back in 1990. So you can imagine how expensive it would be in today's $20, $22. Okay, so that was 1990. And these were conventional oil wells from Louisiana. And then last year, I happened to meet this fellow by the name of Stuart H. Smith. I don't know if he's still with us because apparently he's had some very difficult health issues. But he cut his teeth back in the late 80s in actually prosecuting companies for just that idea of keeping it a secret. And he has his book 2015, and I would recommend it. It's an interesting read. But basically, he was prosecuting these companies for not letting their contractors and their workers actually know that they were being exposed to high levels of radioactivity, especially those that were dealing with cleaning the pipes that were loaded with scale from the oil and gas waste. Because as it turns out, that radium behaves like barium and strontium, that when it combines with sulfate, it forms what they call in the industry scale. So the lining of the pipes, or the pipes can become lined with this scale that's radioactive. So now we have to talk a little bit about the radioactivity, and I hope I'm not moving too fast for you. But there's 3 flavors, and actually, if you watched Jeopardy last night, there was the clue. What type of radiation is the same as a helium atom, and it basically, or nucleus, and basically that's an alpha particle. So we have, oops. Sorry about that. Alpha, beta, and gamma radiation. Alpha is essentially, it's a particle. The only thing that's missing from helium is the 2 electrons that go along with it. But basically, it's a couple of protons and a couple of neutrons. It's rather large because it's a particle, and it's blocked by paper. But nevertheless, if an alpha particle is inhaled by you, which is typically what happens when you're breathing radon, that decay can, act like a little bulldozer and cause some severe damage. Beta particles, they're either an electron or a positron. So again, it's a particle, a little more energetic, and therefore it can pass through paper, but it's basically stopped by your skin. But again, if you were to ingest it or inhale it, and you would have something that would decay with beta emissions, that can lead to health issues. And the last one, and what we've been working with a lot in my lab of recently, is the gamma, which basically is ionizing radiation. It's not a particle, if you will, like beta or alpha, but it's ionizing radiation that literally goes through paper, goes through your skin and foil. It's stopped by concrete or lead. And that's where we can take a look at this pathway on the left-hand side here. So we have alpha, beta, and gamma emissions. So there's your alpha there. There's a beta, which is an electron there. And throughout this, you've got various points in which you're also generating gamma emissions. But this is the uranium-thorium pathway, which eventually winds up with radium. And that's why there's a lot of radium in shales. That radium-226 decays to radon-222. And as I said, I think most of us know about that. And that radon-222 decays to polonium and actinium, bismuth. Anyway, these are additional radioactive elements. So this is radioactive, this is radioactive. Some of them have a long half-life. The half-life for radium-226 is 1,600 years. So it's around for a long time. Radon is only 3.8 days. Now, here's the other important thing to point out. Radium is a solid, it goes into solution, so you find it in the produced water. Radon is a gas and it escapes. And that's why it's really important when we test for total radiation from these fluids and even the rocks, we have to seal them up in a container for at least 21 days for these other daughter products to build up in order to get an an accurate reading of what the actual amount of these radioactive elements are. If you keep them open to air, they will naturally attenuate and you'll get a false low positive, if you will, or a low reading. So getting back to this waste, where is it showing up? Well, it turns out you've got, for the liquids, we've got these injection wells. They're also doing, the good news, they're doing recycling, but at some point they just can't recycle the material further. So it winds up in injection wells, and especially here in Pennsylvania, but it turns out we've looked at places in West Virginia and more specifically in New York. Even though New York has a ban on fracking, it allows oil and gas waste to be buried. Anyway, so we've been looking into that. And again, my question was, is it getting into the drinking water? Because, back in 2015, believe it or not, Charleroi, their public water authority, was having issues with trihalomethanes. Again, it may sound like a diversion here, but it turns out that this experiment that we did in Pennsylvania so many years ago, allowing the industry to bring these brines, quote unquote, directly to wastewater treatment plants, caused all sorts of problems with our drinking water facilities, because what was happening was they were just diluting it 1 in 100. Again, think of how salty these things are. And they were discharging it into our surface waters, like the Three Rivers. And that's the water source for many of these places, including, like, for instance, Charleroi gets their water from the Monongahela. Well, it turns out that when you have residual bromide and organics, when you chlorinate this water, which is in the final stage of disinfection, it creates these cancer-causing chemicals called trihalomethanes. So when Charleroi started having issues again in 2015, after the EPA actually prohibited wastewater treatment plants from taking this material, anyway, they were having trouble again, and they weren't alone. There were a number of other facilities in the Three Rivers basin that were having issues. So what was the problem? And that's when I found out that the landfills were taking this stuff, and the landfill leachate was being treated at where? Public wastewater treatment plants, and discharged into the surface waters. So this is the sample of leachate that I got from the Rostraver landfill in Westmoreland that had been taking oil and gas waste for years. And I'll say, I mean, I don't expect you to know what leachate from landfills do, but it kind of is very similar to that stuff that I showed you previously, okay? That there's this oily film on top. And it turned out that this sample in particular had high levels of chloride, high levels of bromide, and it was radioactive. And again, these numbers don't look, you might say, oh, it's only 120 picocuries per liter. But this landfill, and this is the leachate now, was generating 100 to 300,000 gallons of leachate a day that was being diluted basically 1 in 10 by the waste treatment plant and discharged directly into the Monongahela. So when I went in April of 19 to look at the discharge from the waste treatment plant, sure enough, they had high levels of this is conductivity. So they were not in compliance for their permit for discharge. And more importantly, we did find levels of radium that exceeded the drinking water standard. And again, you might say, well, it's only 20 picocuries being sent into the Monongahela, but that's per liter. And this place was discharging 100 to 300,000 gallons per day. And it builds up, and it turns out it builds up in the sediment. So the good news is that that was the other point, that the dried sludge itself was radioactive. So now you've got a radioactive landfill, you've got a radioactive waste treatment plant, and you've got problems downstream with the drinking water. So the good news was post-restraining order that prevented the landfill from sending this waste to them, things improved dramatically. And the happy story for the drinking water facility is they saw a marked improvement in their source water, and problems kind of resolved themselves. So happy ending, right? But again, there's this legacy, and this is from a paper in 2018 where they found from dedicated facilities that were discharging this brine into surface waters, that it was building up in the sediments. And it's going to be there for perpetuity because, as I said, the half-life of radium-226 is 1,600 years. All right, so what else can we do with this stuff? All right, again, injection wells, maybe. But now the brilliant thing is, let's make de-icer from it. And if you know the owner of this place, he keeps telling the legislation in Ohio that this is what we have to do, and it's much safer than rock salt. Because rock salt, everybody knows, is toxic and we shouldn't be spreading it on our roads. Well, what are the ingredients? And he says ancient seawater. Well, it's not ancient seawater, it's oil and gas waste. It's brine from these apparently conventional operations. But we know from our previous work in my lab and others that this stuff is just as toxic and just as briny and radioactive as unconventional oil and gas well waste. But it's got calcium chloride, magnesium chloride, but it doesn't say anything about the other goodies. And what we found when we analyzed this particular product, we found that it had high levels of chromium, high levels of iron and manganese. Well, you know, people are saying, well, iron and manganese is everywhere. We've got coal mining and mine drainage and stuff, but it's got arsenic and selenium and as I said, even chromium. And it's radioactive. And this particular sample had over 1,000 picocuries of total radium. Okay. And the other thing is that it also has bromide. So what happens when this stuff runs off and winds up in your groundwater and your source water for your drinking water facilities, and you go to chlorinate, again, you're going to have issues with trihalomethanes, which are regulated by the EPA and are reported quarterly by your drinking water authorities. So again, this is the old, this is data from the ODNR, which Mr. Mansbury has challenged. And he also waves a banana at you saying that banana is just as hot. Well, the thing is, banana has potassium 40, which basically decays to argon and calcium, which are both inert and non-radioactive, whereas that radium-226 decays to radon, which decays to polonium and radioactive lead. So here's the other story. As this product sits in your garage, it gets hotter over time as the radiation and daughter products accumulate. And of course, the radiation exposure from consuming a banana is approximately 1% of the daily average exposure to radiation, which is the 100 banana equivalent. So anyway, and then this one here. So I had let this container sit around in my lab for a few months. This is an alpha detector, and basically it's designed to measure radon. So just sitting in my lab for a few months, the buildup of radon in the container was 145 picocuries per liter. So as I said, as radium-226 decays, aqua salina gets hotter due to the buildup of radium, polonium, and lead. So where are we today? Thanks to a colleague at Youngstown State, we're now analyzing, aren't they pretty? Isn't this pretty? These are various products that are being pitched in your state in Ohio for de-icers. And basically they're just like aqua salina. They have all those initial, those interesting constituents, the heavy metals, as well as we're testing for radioactivity. I don't have that data right now, but again, they're not a suitable replacement. As I told a local representative here recently, hoping to get them to move on some legislation here in Pennsylvania, I want you to take a look at your car right now. Especially if you have a dark colored car, you're going to see, what are you going to see on it? You're going to see road salt. And if you have black pants like I do, and you rub up against that car, you're going to get road salt on your pants, and you're going to walk into your house. And if you got little kids, they're going to give you a hug around the waist, and now they've got road salt on them. Okay, but that's calcium, magnesium, and sodium chloride. Imagine if it were these products where you have chromium, arsenic, and radioactivity, and it builds up over time. So anyway, so that's my story, and I'll be happy to answer any questions you might have.
Okay.
Thank you, Dr. Stolz. We have questions in the chat. Let's start off with, it looks like B. Arnell,
Okay, now
Artanel.
hold on. I'm gonna stop my sharing so you don't have to, and then I can see all you wonderful folks. And now I'm gonna
Yeah.
pull up the chat. 13 questions.
Right. Questions
All
to
right.
Dr. Stolz. Can you see them?
Yeah, so the first one is, what kind of time frame do you see the impacts lasting? Well, again, for something like radiation contamination, when you've got a half-life of 1,600 years, it's a long time. And as I said, the behavior of radium-226 in particular, it sticks to stuff. So one of the things we're also looking on, and we're working on a paper right now, thanks to the Park Foundation, my former student was able to get upstream, downstream samples of sediment from a number of places where we know, or it was reported they were discharging this kind of waste, and we're seeing a definite trend: upstream, downstream, upstream less radioactive materials, downstream more. Again, all I'm saying is it may not be a problem today necessarily, but you hear the noise. We're going to be drilling at least for the next 10, 15 years. And especially with the current situation, they're convincing a lot of people that we need to drill more. There's going to be more waste. There's going to be more discharge, and it's going to build up over time. Now, has PFAS replaced polyacrylamide? That's a good question. I have no answer. It was only within the last year that or two that it was discovered. We kind of knew that there was stuff, the EPA knew that they were using, but it was only leaked recently that it was PFAS. So that's a good question. I don't really have an answer. Okay. All right. So someone sent the longitude and latitude for the Cambridge Class 2 well. Link for the New York Times article. I'll make a point for that. Oh, someone put the Rolling Stone. But I can, yeah, I'll send the link to the New York Times. Oh, there we go. Yep, somebody did already. 1990. Thank you very much, Julie. Okay. Aren't you concerned about your prolonged exposure to radioactive chemicals? Well, yeah, we talk about it. My wife still thinks they're going to firebomb our house anyway, so. But not to make light of it, it's what I have to do. I'm still dealing with my radon situation in my house, but I just eat healthy. What are these alternative de-icers made of? It's made up of oil and gas waste. And people, and then, I mean, there's legislation, and if you want, I can send that, the groups that are putting this workshop on today probably have access to these bills, but you would be shocked. The levels of radiation and the levels of toxins that they want to allow these products to have legally is just, it's not based on any, I'm not even going to call it science, any health studies. We thankfully have just published, and some of you actually have a copy of the paper, an assessment of the radiation exposure of repeated applications of aqua salina based on our data. And it is a concern. You keep using this stuff on your sidewalk, it's going to build up over time because it's going to stick to the sidewalk. All right, let's see. All right, yeah, again, I'm working on that with my colleague, and we'll be getting more information out on that soon. Again, we were behind on some of our work because our one piece of equipment died. I had to get a new motherboard, and again, certain supply chain things. But anyway, we're back on track. The other important thing to realize, and this is another game that they play, especially here in Pennsylvania, they only test for certain parameters. And they say, okay, our product has chloride, sodium chloride, calcium chloride, and magnesium chloride, and that's it. But they haven't tested for the heavy metals. And then actually, if they do test for the heavy metals, because there's so much chloride in it to begin with, they have to dilute it 1,000 to 10,000 times. And now your chances of your heavy metals being below the detection limits become a reality. So it's complicated. We've had to analyze those samples over and over and over again at a whole series of dilutions to make sure that we're getting accurate determinations of the constituents. But if you dilute these things 100,000 times, a number of these things that would be considered toxins are going to disappear because they're below the levels of detection, especially things like bromide. So anyway, all right, how do the chemicals used by it's not the chemicals being used by the oil and gas companies, it's the rock itself. So the radioactive materials are in the rock itself. And this is something I've also expressed concern about. In the old days with a vertical well, you'd be going through a variety of different formations, shales, coal, whole bunch of other stuff. So you'd have a big mixture of your rock cuttings. But now, because you're going down and now going out several miles, the majority of your rock cuttings are these shales. And it's these shales that are toxic and radioactive because of what they've accumulated when they were forming so many millions of years ago. Okay, so we'll get some names out there as far as these other products. Okay. All right, and that's the other important thing too. I know someone talked about the using the raw brine itself for road treatments. There's a new paper or a recent paper out of Penn State, again, was funded by our own PADEP. And basically it said that using oil and gas brine from even conventional wells is worse than doing nothing as far as dust suppression. Right. And we've got a study that we did in Warren County many years ago that raised the question of actually, what were they actually using these brines for? Because if they were brining during a time when it was raining or just after a rain, there was really no reason to apply brine, but they did it anyway. And then we also had a situation where we had 3 different companies that were brining the same road. So each of them were quote unquote in compliance, but the road itself was being triple dosed. So anyway, and not good because it eventually, this salty water will deteriorate a roadbed very quickly. Okay, so what advocacy techniques have been most successful? Well, again, you can use the I would say the published peer-reviewed studies, just saying like this is what the science is saying, but you have to distill it into something they can understand. But I think the reality right now is that there has to be a change in governance in the sense that, right now, especially in Pennsylvania here, the heads of both environmental and energy committees, the one in the Senate, the one in the House, they are proponents of oil and gas. So any hope of getting any legislation through to stop this stuff is DOA. So this is the unfortunate thing, and you just have to be vigilant. Okay, so the last question here is the federal exemption for oil and gas exploration to major provisions to 7 protective laws and waste made special, so exempt RCRA, yeah. So basically we have to work on the EPA, we have to work on the federal government, talk to your local, federal representatives and senators.
Dr. Stolz, there's one thing I would like to bring up, and this is the perfect lead into it. I'm right now in the talks with some attorneys who are contemplating very strongly the possibility of doing a federal petition to take away this exemption. So if any of you are interested in following up with that, if you could put your name and your phone number in our chat, then I will be certain to have your contact information for, excuse me, for the attorneys. So it's something that, especially because I'm here in Ohio, I know that we're never going to win at our local state houses. You know, it's going to take, you know, an act of God and, you know, to do anything, but, you know, hopefully he's on our side and maybe we can get the attorneys to move and help us do this. So please put your contact information in the chat. And so are there any more questions for Dr. Stolz? We still have a few minutes, so we're awfully quiet.
Okay, well, good. We're all stunned. No, I mean, and again, what is my motivation? My motivation is the fact that this industry has for years been given subsidies, whether it's you know, looking the other way with regards to disposal of their waste or other things. And I'm just tired at this point of hearing that renewables are not the answer because they're not cost effective. And the only reason why oil and gas continues to be quote unquote cost effective is because, I mean, I think it's something on the order globally of something like $11 million a minute in subsidies. I mean, it's the subsidies are, it's billions of dollars every year that this industry is being subsidized. Mm-hmm. And again, even today, it was kind of interesting driving in. The discussion was about energy independence. We currently export more than we import. So we are technically at the stage of quote unquote energy independence. And yet, because it's a globally traded commodity, mm-hmm. oil is now over $100 a barrel and they want to drill more. And it's going to mean more waste. Same thing with the cracker plant. They're firing it up. They're getting ready to light the candle, as they say. And that was another surprise for the folks in Beaver. What do you mean there's going to be a constant flare? The answer is yes. You didn't know that? You didn't realize that? Well, they realize it now. So again, I predicted it would take 1,000 wells per day to feed that plant. And so again, these, you know, these fluids that they inject are eventually going to come back and it's got to go somewhere. And we know it's toxic and it's radioactive and it's got to be dealt with appropriately.
Any more questions, guys? We still have about 15 minutes. Okay, no, cool.
I see a hand.
I have a question. Yeah. Yes, so I am aware of the Bevel and Benson amendments, and I'm just wondering if the radioactive brine is regulated at all outside of RCRA.
My understanding, it's not.
Yeah, no. Are you thinking it is? Are you thinking it is?
Well, I'm just wondering, you know, do they have to have any sort of oversight of the waste at all, or is it just, and they can do whatever they want with it and it's anyone's guess
well, this is something
and where it goes?
This is something that's state to state. And again, that's another thing that the industry has been very successful at doing at the federal level. We don't need federal regulations. The states can handle it themselves. So in Texas, you have things called, they actually spray it on farms.
Right.
Okay. In Pennsylvania here, we've been, you know, at least for the conventional, we've turned the other cheek and allowed them to use it for, you know, road treatments and even some dumping, as long as, and now they've even trying to say that if the company that had the spill can show that there's been no impact to the stream that it was spilled into, that they don't have to report it as a spill.
Right.
You know, they're redefining the definition of pollution. And we have clean streams, and you know, that's our protection, is if we can prove through our Clean Streams Act. But a lot of the other stuff is just, you know, if you define it as brine, you've opened up an avenue. And I don't think there's, I mean, it's got to be similar in Ohio, because otherwise you guys would be stopping these trucks at the border.
Right. No, Ohio, everything's fair game in Ohio for the industry. So Julie and then Doug. Julie, go ahead.
Hi, I just wanted to make a comment. I'm in southwestern Pennsylvania in Dr. Stolz's territory. So even in my small little local community, the local fracking company wants to use our little trout stocked stream to suck out millions of gallons of water a day to use for fracking. So that's like at the other end of this whole issue, is at least here in Pennsylvania, the drilling companies seem to have free access and permits from the DEP to use all our local freshwater resources for, you know, their own operations. And this, to me, this is another huge problem. Maybe Dr. Stolz would want to make a comment. Thanks.
Thank you, Julie.
Yeah.
John, yep.
Yeah, just to say, I mean, and thanks to folks like Julie, we are alerted to the situation. My colleague has actually done a lot of work in Big Sewickley Creek, and has found an endangered species that's very happy there and is in several places within the water system. But their initial proposal was to drain 3 million gallons a day. And now they're back with a proposal to drain 1.5 million gallons a day. But no one's done any flow studies. No one's looked at what the impact would be on the watershed, on the groundwater, and how it might even impact people in the area. Not just the stream. It's a trout stream that's actually stocked. But anyway, but what about the water wells? You know, that's how these things get recharged.
Right. Okay. Dr. Stolz, was there more questions put in chat that you need to answer? And then we'll go to Doug.
Okay. Has anyone done a thorough investigation of how this is impacting water for EJ communities? I will tell you again, I've been since late 2011, I've been working with a community up in Butler that they haven't had water since basically 2010. So, you know, it is an EJ or environmental justice situation, but you know, 10 families sued the company. They settled. Each one got a check for $16,000, and the company went bankrupt, and now it's owned by another company, but the issue's never been resolved. I mean, you're not going to fix your water issue. It's going to cost over $1 million to bring city water or public water. This is the issue. This was never thought out. So absolutely, these are, and then again, what we're trying to find out now, and this is the most bizarre thing. There is a well pad in north of Pittsburgh. The pad has already been prepared and everything, and I've been sent some of the documents. It's going to drill. They're going to drill underneath a mobile home park that's been there for decades, and it's not on any of the maps. It doesn't exist as far as the DEP is concerned or the company, and yet the closest home is 50 feet from the edge of the well pad. Okay, they don't exist. So this is something we're going to see what we can do about, but it's just.
Doug, do you have a question?
Oh, just a comment that I think of how we need to start making some, I want to say, friends, some contacts with the rest of the movement. You think of voters' rights, all those issues, because what's rearing its head is this old argument of states' rights. And is it, the damn Civil War is still with us. And we're fighting these issues again. And it's the same, we just watched the Ken Burns series again, and I'm thinking the rhetoric is almost identical to like 160 years ago. And, the issue of this mobile home park is a classic example, but just that we feel we don't have any voice anymore.
Yeah.
So this is a tough issue. Then I'd also like to thank John again for sending me that paper. I'm talking to Colleen's class on a week from tomorrow, and we've required your Gaia paper for reading for the students. So
Thank you. Thank you.
Okay,
That's the fun stuff anyway.
there was an Ashley that had her hand up, but I don't see her now.
Oh, yeah.
There
They
you go.
answered my question.
Okay.
But my follow-up that I had was just like, how do I learn? Because like you mentioned, Brian kind of gets, is it one of the many categories it could be listed under, but like, what is the simplest, I'm going to use that word, but you know what I mean? Like, what is the best way for me to like figure out in the Pacific Northwest, like at this using, because we have like a lot of agriculture land, for instance, and I work predominantly with people that are coded as farm workers, right? So I'm just like wanting to make sure that I understand kind of like how some of this might be happening locally in my region. And maybe I just like didn't catch it under the oil and gas, right? Because they're using these different terminologies.
Well, I think for the Pacific Northwest, it depends, and I'll have to go back again, a little bit of selfless promotion. The fracking book that I've put together with a number of colleagues is in the proof stage. So hopefully by this summer, we'll have a book that will have the latest on what's been going on, and especially with where, say, deposits are in the United States. I'm not aware of any major deposits in the Pacific Northwest, obviously down in California. But again, the way the industry works is that they don't like to ship this stuff. And if they can deal with it locally, they will. So it may not, this waste stream may not be making it up into your neck of the woods, although again, I could be mistaken, especially if some waste company has decided that this is a revenue stream that they want to tap into, and it's permissible.
Well, Dr. Stolz and Ashley, remember that Aqua Salina has been approved by the Pacific Northwest Snow Fighters Association.
Oh.
So you may want to contact them to see if and they don't even test for the radiation. We have tried to get them to not allow this to be an approved product, but you may want to check with the Pacific Snow Fighters, Pacific Northwest Snow Fighters Association, to find out, if it may be being used in your area.
Because I was thinking, I think I saw something about it, like you were saying, around de-icing communities, because that's a really big thing here. So I'll look that up. Thanks.
Yeah. And it could be, it's either under the Pacific Snow Fighters, or it could be under a group called Clear Roads. We contacted both of those, so you may check those. And Frankie, you have a question? Where'd you go?
Yeah. I'm sorry. My name is Frankie Arona. I'm with Society of Native Nations and the American Indian Movement. We do have a Pipelines to Plastics campaign that is, directly addressing the desal plants here along the Gulf, here in Texas and in California on the coast. What I have found here in Texas is that, and one of the challenges that we're dealing with here, which is we consider to be one of the most problematic, is that the city of Corpus Christi has already said during city meetings that they project in the next few years that 80% of their water will go to industry. Having the largest cracker plant here on the Gulf of Texas, in Corpus Christi, in the United States, we're seeing that projection increasing the infrastructure build out of petrochemicals And I don't think people are really understanding or realizing that the desalination plants and the rhetoric that's coming out of it, when they're trying to say that, water is a human right, without addressing the real issues, which is taking the control away from corporations rather than giving them more control over our water. But nonetheless, we feel that, stopping the desal plants and desalination plants is stopping future petrochemical build out and other infrastructure build out, not just along the Gulf, but throughout the world, because it is, it isn't a solution. It's a false solution. And the byproduct, like you said, is a lot more damaging than most people even know. But again, like I said, I think, my question would be like, why isn't there more discussion on the fact that, we can actually slow down and stop future build outs by stopping this desalination plants, because those facilities need that water in order to function as an infrastructure. So yeah, I just wonder why we don't talk more about that.
It's a good
Well,
question.
Yeah, I was
I-
going to say, one of the things that I keep asking, and it's unfortunate, is, we have this term in science called mass balance. And basically what it means is, you follow things. So in other words, you're saying about desalination. Yeah, desalination is a great technology, but it's a lot of energy. And what are you going to do with that salt that you've removed from the fresh water? Okay, where does it go? I'm asking them the same thing with this evaporation system that they want to use to get rid of the leachate at this landfill. Where's the radium going? It's not just going to dissipate. Where is it going to go? You know how much, and why I'm saying this is because they plan to use this evaporation system to get their volume of leachate down 95%. So if you do that and you still have the radium in there, you're going to go from hundreds of picocuries per liter to tens of millions of picocuries per liter in a much smaller volume. So suddenly it does become an issue because you've got this radioactive mass on your hands, and they don't seem to be concerned about it. Yeah. And that's all I'm asking. And the same thing with these waste, these brines coming out of these wells is so concentrated that you can't dilute it to the point where it's usable for anything. So anyway, good question.
Yeah, we have a couple more minutes, and I wanted to let y'all know that next month's training calls will be on PFAS. So look for an invite or a notice to come out from CHEJ about that training call. Dr. Stolz, you want to look through your questions one more time since we've got just a couple minutes left?
All right,
Oh, by the way, hold on just a second. By the way, my email address is tmills@chej.org. So if you want to follow up with me on the lawyer and the petition idea, please feel free to send me an email. Go ahead, John.
All right, well, the one question, would drilling through shale for PCB dump result in radioactive components in the leachate? And again, it's a natural constituent of the formation water in these shales. So the answer would be yes. The other thing is banning fracking the solution. I would just say, the Stone Age didn't end because we ran out of stones. So I think in this particular case, we just need to move forward, and the alternatives will obviate the need to frack. And seriously, I was reading, I'm again listening this morning that places like Germany, they intend to be mostly electric vehicles by 2030. And they're doing it. I mean, this is the amazing thing. They're doing it. The technology exists. But again, it's got to be, there's not a single solution to everything, We need mixed grid. We need DC appliances, which, by the way, if we switch to DC appliances, we would drop our energy needs considerably. Our current way of producing energy in this country, we lose 64% of what we produce. Even addressing that can, make an impact on how much we actually have to drill and that sort of thing. So
Right.
there's other solutions. Yeah.
Yeah, we need to move away from antique energy, which is what we're doing right now, and we need to stop burning Barney.
There is one more, the last question
Okay,
from Hunter. Can you see
There-
it, Dr. Stolz?
Is there not a federal protocol to contain the nuclear products? Do they not need to go underground? Again, they're exempt.
Mhm.
Oil and gas is exempt by one means or another. I mean, whether it's the Energy Policy Act of 2005 or other acts that are much older, but they've always,
right. Right. Okay,
well, thanks for the invitation.
right. All right, everyone, have a great day, and we will be sending Dr. Stoltz's documents out to you, so look for that either today or tomorrow,
And the recording.
and the recording, yes. So everyone have a great day.
Thanks for putting it all together, and thanks, Dr. Stolz. We appreciated it. And you too, Teresa. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone. Hang in there, Hunter. Stay with me. Sharon. Oh, yeah.